Hey everyone, welcome to episode 22 and a half of the Miami Tech Pod. This is a special edition episode of the pod that we're excited to bring to you. We're here with a very special guest around a very special event, CoMotion Miami. And we have John Rossant here, the CEO of CoMotion and the chairman of the New Cities Foundation. John, welcome to the Miami Tech Pod.
Well, thanks, Cesar. I'm just delighted to be here.
Yeah.
I mean, be here in Miami and to be talking to you on Miami Tech Pod.
So, it's interesting because we have a lot of listeners and people that, watch the podcast on YouTube who are really just getting out there, like part of the community. They're going to a bunch of events. They're networking like crazy right now. And but this is a bit of a new one for them, right? The people that are the locals here and people who are building really cool tech companies may not be super familiar with CoMotion. Why don't you tell our listeners what CoMotion is all about and of course what your work at the New Cities Foundation entails?
Yeah, well, as I founded the New Cities Foundation about 12 years ago. I've been in charge of putting together the World Economic Forum in Davos for quite a few years.
Which, by the way, that's ridiculously cool. Do you just slip that in conversations? Or?
No, because I say that because I think it's really kind of it helped form the DNA of who we are.
Sure.
And part of that is one, international, two, bringing stakeholders together. So public sector leaders, private sector leaders. And, about a decade and a half ago, I began to really focus my attention on cities, the problematic of cities, and that the impact of connectivity technologies, digital technologies in cities would be massive. And we have to look at that. And at that time, the World Economic Forum was actually not that interested in cities. So I launched my own foundation and had a lot of very early support from, outfits like Cisco and Ericsson and General Electric and others. And when you look at cities, you very quickly come to the mobility and transportation piece. So some of our first research and activities was in the mobility space. But then about 7-8 years ago, Google approached us because they were starting to very much spend a lot of R&D money on autonomous mobility, which was later spun out into Waymo.
Sure.
Which is a big autonomy player. But at that time, they were trying to figure out the sort of urban piece. How would driverless cars fit into an urban context in the future? And so they knocked on our door. We're flattered to have Google as a member of our foundation. And it was exactly the same time that a little San Francisco startup named Uber burst out onto the scene.
Sure.
And was starting to offer, black chauffeured cars on demand in New York for less than the cost of a normal taxi cab at the time. And I think within this very short space of time, we realized, wow, this is going to be an unprecedented disruption for cities, big and small, all over the world. And so as a city-focused organization, we had to look at that. And so we started a very high-level conference at that time called Cities on the Move, which was really the first of its kind anywhere in the world, that brought together people working in battery electric and autonomy, in mobility as a service, sort of quite siloed, sort of early stage movers and shakers. And we had that in Mountain View. We had a second edition in London, and we met in Tokyo. We started a research program at New Cities Foundation on connected mobility. And then we started looking very closely at Los Angeles because it's the world's largest car city.
Yeah,
say.
totally.
You were just there, I know,
Yeah.
and you sort of witnessed firsthand the wonderful traffic in Los Angeles.
Yeah, for the listeners, I was in LA. I met up with John for dinner, and a couple of weeks in advance, I sent him my itinerary, and I was like, "Hey, how does this look?" And he's like, "A lot of driving."
Right. So, but what the city really was starting to grapple with this, and it had come out about 7 years ago with something called the Mobility 2035 plan,
okay,
which was essentially a blueprint for if not a post-car Los Angeles, at least a multimodal future for the city. And we went out there and we realized, this would be the best place for this kind of itinerant global conference.
Sure.
And that was how CoMotion was born. We launched CoMotion LA 5 years ago. We spun it off into a separate entity called CoMotion. And at the same time, started a kind of media platform about emerging mobility. And it kind of coincided with, I wrote a book on the mobility revolution.
And
that HarperCollins.
Yeah, I was going to say, tell our audience the title and how they could.
It's called Hop, Skip, and Go.
There you go.
And I wrote it with a former colleague and a great friend called Steve Baker. And so anyway, CoMotion was started in LA, and it gathered very quickly, literally thousands of people from all around the world. Because again, we have a very international approach. We believe cities learn from each other around the world.
Sure.
And so Europeans came, Asians came, Latin American, et cetera. And then about 3.5 years ago, we had a delegation from Miami at CoMotion LA. And they approached us. They were really, I think, one of the members was Carlos Cruz Casas, who's become a great friend, my brother.
We'll see him around today.
And he'll be around today. And, said, hey, we'd love to have something like this in Miami. And we immediately responded positively because we didn't actually know at that time too much about Florida and Miami.
Right.
Except, nice beaches and beautiful sand and et cetera. But what intrigued us at that time was the incredible dynamism we were starting to see in Latin American cities.
Great.
In Bogota, in Medellin, in Sao Paulo, in Lima.
All cities with really, really tough transportation challenges, right?
Yes, but a huge amount of innovation.
Yeah.
And so, the New York MTA was learning about was taking some examples of how Bogota was structuring its bus system and applying it in New York. And you also had a time where it was a time, still now you have these amazing Latin American unicorns, particularly in the logistics area. And so we thought Miami is so much the center, the global hub of Latin America and for Latin America. So this would be really good. And we came out here, and I must say the first time I came out here about 3 years ago, I got off the plane. I thought, beaches, freeways, palm trees. It's just like LA,
right?
Just like Southern California, and it's not at all the case. It's such a different city, of course. But what's so incredible about Miami, and this is something we realized 3 years ago. It's not recent. Is just the can-do attitude. Let's make this work. That, very pro-business, which is nice. It's a city that respects innovation, that respects the private sector, and just open to new ways of doing things. I love LA. It's great, but it's a complicated city with legacy systems that go back, a long time.
Right.
This is a city where we feel you can get things done, and plus there's, the economic vitality we see here is just extraordinary. Yeah,
definitely. So let's talk a little bit about, CoMotion's in Miami. We're at the conference right now. We're at the Arsenale in Design District, and you've had this background of bringing these amazing big thinkers in business and in urban landscapes together. What do you kind of expect out of this in the context of all of these leaders in the mobility space gathering here? Not just what are the key takeaways that you expect at the conference, but what do you think
the impact will be?
The impact will be, especially for Miami, right? I know everyone kind of has, let's be honest, our transportation, public transportation system has a far way to go. We have some serious challenges here. So what do you expect the takeaway for local stakeholders and local leaders to get out of CoMotion?
Well, look, I mean, you raised a lot of things, so let me unpack that a little bit. I mean, I think that this has been an extraordinary year and a half, you have to admit.
Right.
Unprecedented pandemic that's really changed kind of the ways we really look at urban life. In so many ways, we have a new administration that is city forward. It's a real break with the Trump administration. Very big focus on infrastructure, on equity, on inclusivity, on fighting climate change. So I think CoMotion brings people together at a kind of basic level. And that's important because people need to meet. And, it's those almost sort of spontaneous moments where, hey, that's really an interesting idea. I'll finance it.
Right.
Or let's come together and form a partnership to attack this particular issue. So CoMotion also, by the way, is not just the 2 days of CoMotion Miami. We've really been investing here. So, for example, last year at the first CoMotion Miami, we launched together with the Department of Transportation and Public Works of Miami-Dade County, the CoMotion Lab Miami, which is an innovation lab that focuses on actually bringing in new mobility technologies and trying them out, testing them in the territory of the county, the 5,500 miles of roads that the county has, the airspace, the waterways. And so we have two focuses at the CoMotion Lab Miami, one is urban air mobility. And it's an exploding field. I don't mean that in a bad way, but in a very positive way. Miami and South Florida. Florida is perfect geography and topography for low altitude air mobility. This is how we will get around in the future. I mean, in 10 years' time, for you and I to go to Palm Beach this afternoon, we'll hop on an electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, and we'll be in Palm Beach in 10 minutes.
And yeah, look, that's fascinating. I think we're seeing, actually, why don't you talk a bit about that, right? Like, why don't you unpack kind of the companies that not only you've brought together here, and some of the players that are going to be, who are mobility innovators, who are going to be a part of CoMotion, but also, what some of the real investments that they're thinking about, right? You're someone not only that runs a media platform, but you have a journalism background, and you're someone that's a bit in the know. Why don't you share with our listeners kind of like what we're seeing in that innovation space, what companies are starting to announce?
Well, just in the urban air mobility space, which is one that not a lot of people know about.
Right.
But, traditionally to go from, again, Miami to Palm Beach, we would take either the Bright Line, I guess, in the future, or we drive, and there'd be traffic jams, etc. There are billions and billions and billions of dollars now going into electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, whether it's Joby Aviation on the West Coast, Whisk, which is a joint venture of Boeing and a New Zealand company backed by one of the founders of Google, Lilium and Volocopter from Germany. Right. All of them now are, since actually we arrived in Florida, are becoming active in Florida. I think Volocopter, for example, is setting up their headquarters in Miami. That will mean hundreds of jobs. Lilium is very involved. Another German eVTOL manufacturer is very involved in Orlando, and it's down here as well. This is going to be a transformative new industry. I think that Miami can be one of the great hubs in North America, if not the world, for it. It's a strong aerospace tradition in Florida. Mm-hmm. It's a flat landscape with a sort of north-south axis of urbanization lends itself to low altitude mobility.
And also, just learning a bit about the space, it's really attractive that you can get off land and on top of water very quickly.
Exactly.
In most urban cities. So it makes that, you can navigate around FAA flight plans a little easier and whatnot. And then, of course, from a public acceptance standpoint, regulators are just feel a little bit better about you flying over water than over cities.
Yeah, exactly. And I think if I were kind of a long-term economic planner for this region, I would say let's focus on areas where we can have a real comparative advantage.
Sure.
And where we can be really strong competition for the world. One area is certainly urban air mobility in cities. Another area, which is just coming to life now, and I'm particularly excited about it, is the whole area of maritime transportation.
Yeah.
Both as a means of conveyance within a city. So taking, going from, let's say, downtown Miami to Miami Beach in a ferry, a very high-speed ferry that just drops you off. The geography lends itself to that, but also in the whole area of decarbonizing boats, whether it's a little pleasure boat going up to a super tanker.
Right.
That has to be decarbonized.
Yeah, this is a really big boating region, as I'm sure you're aware. Right?
Yeah, and it's the cruising capital of the world.
Yeah.
And this is coming. Everybody's aware of it. We've only just started to decarbonize this sector yet. But Miami can be a leader because it is a leader in this area.
It's interesting because in this kind of tech community in general here in Miami, there are very few, I would argue there are very few companies that are building enterprises where there's a really real blend between the digital and the physical, right? Like we know Uber is one of these companies that had a presence here in Miami. When I worked there, I think we were up to 50 employees that worked in Brickell. And they were tackling some of these problems, but still the engineering teams, et cetera, were always in San Francisco. And I think that if you're right, if the thesis is right, that this is because of the proximity to such great testing grounds for this technology, be that, urban air mobility or, the blue tech phenomenon, right? That we're going to see these companies kind of emerge here in Miami and have a real presence.
But we are already, by the way.
Sure. Yeah. Well, why don't you share some of that?
It's where do I start? There's one small startup, but I think it's so emblematic of what can happen and will happen in Miami. The future are the paddle guys.
Yeah, paddle.
We just love them. When I kind of read about them I think it was a Facebook post last year, that's cool.
Yeah.
And it's, these three guys who grew up together in Key Biscayne.
Yep, Key Biscayne.
And they're, kind of late 20s, I guess, sort of early 30s, very dynamic. One's good at marketing, one's good at tech, one's good in putting the business together. And Paddle, of course, is a sharing paddleboard company.
Yep.
So instead of schlepping your paddleboard to the beach, paddleboards are huge. You have an app and you pay, I think, $15 or $20 a month, and you can you have these racks of paddleboards on the beach, and you can take them out the way you would take out a electric scooter, a Lime scooter. And it's just a simple but incredibly beautiful business model.
So we're going to have Andres and the founding team on the pod in the future. But what's interesting, I think that they're developing. Hopefully, I can share this. If not, I'll edit it out. But what they're developing is some smart sensors that go on the actual paddleboards themselves to test things like water quality, salinity levels, et cetera, and get that data and send it to the government agencies that are constantly testing water safety levels, that are constantly, trying to make sure that, our beaches are safe to swim in and all of that.
Right.
And what a cool partnership, right? Yeah. For as you're out there exercising, and enjoying our water here, the government's actually tracking.
And you're doing good.
Right.
You're doing good for the world. Absolutely. At the other end of the spectrum, there's of course Reef Technology.
Sure.
Which is, a purebred, pure Miami company. Very, very forward looking. And it's great. These guys originally from France come here, set this up, figure let's take, the urban world is full of these huge parking structures. They can be repurposed using technologies to make mobility hubs, to make delivery stations, etc. So COVID, in fact, has been, I think, quite good for Reef. Very, very innovative company that's not only in Miami, but it's across North America and the world. So
let's talk really quick about, let's go back to autonomous vehicles, right? Because this is an area where we have seen some really significant players in the industry take a look at Miami for a bunch of reasons, mainly because we have great testing conditions here. There's no snow, there's no rain. It's kind of for where we are in the AV curve. It's the right place at the right time. So we had Alex Roy on the podcast a couple of episodes ago. Yeah, good old Alex. And he's someone we have these conversations a lot about, like, how far away are we from full scale adoption, right? That's the big, $1 trillion question that everyone's trying to answer.
Level 5,
right?
Yes.
Level 5. Is it possible? You have a very fractured industry with different approaches. Some people say, like, it's just a pipe dream. We're like years, like decades and decades away from that. But at the same time, the rate of innovation is kind of accelerating. And at the same time, you see consolidation in the industry. So there's like fewer dollars that are actually going to fight off competition and more towards, the R&D aspect of it. What are we seeing right now in the autonomous vehicle space, and what do you think? Like, when will Miami see full scale adoption of self-driving cars?
That's not going to happen for a while, and I think that's a realization that the industry has come to over the past year and a half, and these sort of early promises of, by 2025 we'll all be moving around in autonomous vehicles that will, in the middle of the night, I'll say, send me a donut and my little autonomous vehicle will go fetch it for me or something. That's just not going to happen for maybe several decades, if ever. It's a really, really hard technological nut to crack. But there's sort of level 3 and level 4, which is sort of limited autonomy, which we see already, whether it's, the kind of so-called autonomy that you have in a Tesla, which is pretty sophisticated. You can sort of read a book while you're on a freeway, when you're behind the wheel of a Tesla. We'll have things like much greater autonomy for trucking. A lot of companies are working on that. And so you'll have convoys of trucks that are autonomous. They go in freeways. It's fairly easy. You'll have a lot of autonomy in things like airport shuttles. The one that takes you from Terminal 1 to the rent-a-car station or something like that. So more and more we'll see this happen. And again, you mentioned, Miami and Florida have always been a real magnet for a lot of these companies, like Waymo and others. Because
Argo.
Argo. And Argo is one of the few pure play autonomy companies. Very, very exciting company, very dynamic. It's based in Pittsburgh, but Miami is probably its most important operational hub. They've been very linked with Ford Autonomy. Ford is a very big shareholder in Argo. And so they're, have a big center in Wynwood, which I visited, really extraordinary. And of course, Alex is part of that. The other, Florida has also has this very particular kind of geofenced communities, retirement communities, like the Villages. It's not Miami, but that's one of the reasons why, you have these kind of big Petri dishes where you can test out things.
Yeah. So your thesis, and what we're kind of observing right now, is that autonomous vehicles are here and are going to scale very quickly in controlled environments, right? With fewer variables.
Yes, exactly.
Like closed communities, or like, university campuses and low speed.
I'll give you another example. Our friends at Reef Technology. Right now, if you live in Miami, as I'm sure some of your listeners know already, 3 a.m, if you need a pint of milk, you go on, I don't know what app, it's Uber or Deliveroo or something like that, DoorDash. And a reef technology delivery bot, autonomous delivery bot, will kind of navigate the streets and park itself in front of your condo building. You'll descend, you'll have a code in your app, you can open it up, and there's your pint of milk.
Yeah.
That's happening today. And of course, that will become more and more ubiquitous as we move forward. So very excited.
So let's kind of end on electrification and the impacts of carbon emissions on climate change, right? I think that's a space that we're seeing a lot of players in mobility being really intentional about. They're saying we're not going to just build a network of vertical takeoff and landing cars or aircrafts. We're going to make them electric. Right? We're not going to build these sidewalk robots that deliver somebody from point A to point B, or in the case of a company like Neuro, which actually has motor vehicles on the road, delivering things from point A to point B. We're going to make it electric. I'm going to be moderating a panel later in CoMotion about whether, getting a lot of really important stakeholders together about whether cities are prepared for that electric vehicle kind of revolution that we're really seeing in a real way. What are your thoughts there? I mean, are we prepared?
No.
Do we see that being a big challenge? What do we have to change in order to accept this adoption?
How many hours do we have? Cesar? Look, you need to bring in utilities. You have to strengthen the electrical grid. The way the grid governance is something that in this country that dates back over 100 years, hasn't really changed. It's very kind of old. We have to look at that again. Yeah. We have to bring it into the 21st century. It implies a lot of changes in the way buildings are built with parking structures. So instead of, if you go to a condo, I think in the future, if you live in an apartment block, you need to have charging stations that are part of the building. Because finding a charging station is one of the big challenges if you have an electric car.
By the way, I'm in the market for an electric car right now. I was inspired by you gave me a ride back to my hotel in Los Angeles in your Chevy Bolt. But that was the first question I had for my HOA in the building I'm moving into. Do you have outlets or charging ports for cars? And the answer was no.
Which is crazy, but I think there's a great LA company which is very active here in Miami called Envoy Technologies.
Sure. Yep.
And their whole what they do is they go to apartment managers and developers and say, we'll put in a whole block of charging stations you're building and cars. We'll manage them, and it will be mobility as a service. So your tenants don't have to have a car. Right. They'll just go down and they'll have 5 hours of mobility per week as part of the lease, something like that. I mean, that is the future.
And what role do you think government plays here? Right, because we're seeing, not surprisingly, private sector operators move fast in the space. Companies like ChargePoint. Some of the actual car manufacturers, right? Tesla is like. They view this, a company like Revel is also thinking about charging infrastructure. They view this as not only essential for adoption of EVs, but they also view it as like a pretty significant business to be in, right? So what role does government play?
Look, government has to provide the kind of smart, intelligent, open regulatory framework in which this all can exist and prosper. Yeah. So what's really interesting in what we look at, so the urban mobility field, is that it's gone are the days, it's finished when, let's say, a bird can just start up and put in 10,000 scooters in a city with no regulatory framework, or an Uber, since you mentioned it, can just start up operations and without a kind of regulatory framework. Yeah. That's finished.
Correct.
Urban mobility of tomorrow is going to be will depend on a very healthy public-private partnership and cooperation. Right. And so what cities are demonstrating, I think Miami-Dade is very forward-looking in this, is that they've become real partners who are sitting at the table with the private sector. Right. They understand the technology. If you take Carlos Cruz Casas at Miami-Dade. He's someone who knows as much about technology as someone from the private sector.
He could run like the product teams at any of these companies. I mean, he's really, really dialed in.
Let's not say that too out because he might be tempted to move.
So, look, this has kind of been a fascinating discussion. I'm really excited to see, we're going to be here for 48 hours, really dialing in, talking a lot about different areas of urban mobility and what we're seeing in innovation in that space. What are some closing thoughts that you want to share with the listeners? Like, first of all, how should people follow CoMotion? Let's start there. This is going to be an annual conference in Los Angeles and Miami.
Yeah.
For the people listening saying, I definitely want to get more involved. Like, where do you point them to?
Just go to our website, one of our websites, CoMotionMiami.com, CoMotionLA.com, CoMotionNews.com. Have a look. We're happy to involve everybody. I think I'm really excited about what the third edition next year of CoMotion Miami can be, and what will happen to the ecosystem in here and how it's going to move forward in a year. I can't wait to come back.
Right.
It's again so dynamic here. I think when we have this discussion at the third edition of CoMotion Miami next year, it'll be a completely different discussion. And that's what's so exciting about this constantly moving forward, changing city that you live in.
Great. Well, John, thanks for joining the Miami Tech Pod. This is awesome.
Thanks, pal.
We'll kind of check back in with you at some point, from now to the next CoMotion.
Yeah, let's do this again sort of mid-year.
Yeah, I want to see what some of the trends are, what came out of this. If there's, like you said, if there's policy recommendations that came out of the C Lab work, the CoMotion Lab work with Miami-Dade County.
Well, you'll be hearing about some of them today, actually.
That's great.
Today and tomorrow.
Can't wait, and we look forward to continuing this conversation. And thanks for choosing Miami as a place to. I know it was
we'll take 2 to tango.
Awesome. For those listening, this was a special bonus edition of the Miami Tech Pod live from CoMotion, and we will see you next week. We have a bunch of great guests coming up, so make sure to like and subscribe. Follow us on social media at Miami Tech Pod, and we will we'll be next Monday with a really, really fascinating episode. Some great startup founders that you'll really enjoy. So make sure to tune in.